Hi, I'm Destiny Thompson, and I'm going to talk a little bit about environmental risk factors today. So I do have a statistic from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to start us off. It says 1 in 6 adults have experienced 4 or more risk factors. So a risk factor is essentially any type of trauma or hardship that we do go through as a child. And if I had to put money on it, I would say that most of you have experienced at least one, if not more. In fact, I would put money that all of you have experienced one, if not more. However, luckily, most of us have protective factors working against those risk factors. So there are 3 different types of risk factors: biological, within the self, within the child; familial, that child's close family; and then environmental, which is what I'm going to talk a little bit more about today. So there are 3 different environmental risk factors that I want to talk about. There's poverty, violence exposure, and finally the media. So I'm going to talk about each of those risk factors and then specifically 2 effects found in those risk factors. So I do have a quote to start us all off from an academic journal comprised of medical professionals. It says that the first few years of life are marked by development at a scale and pace that is unsurpassed later in childhood and sets foundation for subsequent growth and development. I included this because the childhood time of our life is one of, I would argue, the most important times of our lives. It is when we really get that foundation. Everything that happens in our childhood can come back later on and be connected to our adult life or anything that we struggle with. Childhood development is so incredibly important, and you will see how these risk factors can affect childhood development in different ways. So the first one we're going to talk about is poverty. I do have a statistic from the Center for Poverty Research. It says that 39.7 million Americans are living in poverty, which is an obscene number. So we've done a lot of research on what poverty can do for individuals and specifically on children. So the first 3 is social deprivation, mental health issues, and potential bullying at school due to their income levels. So the 2 that I do want to specify, the first one is poor physical health. Oftentimes, those in poverty are in a cycle of poverty that they have been unable to break for possibly many generations. That said, they likely live in unsanitary households, could be malnourished, and are also found to have higher rates of asthma, infant mortality, and obesity, among many other things, due to them not focusing so much on their health, not being able financially to focus so much on their health. They are found to be at poor physical health, and that could essentially lead to more chronic illnesses down the line. The next one we're going to talk about is underachievement in schools. Oftentimes, children in impoverished homes live in a single parent household, meaning that single mom, that single dad, that single adult is focusing on how they're going to pay that next bill, how they are going to feed the children next. They're focused on the stressors of being impoverished. That said, they are likely unable to help the child with anything school related due to either lack of time or, as I said, they have been in that cycle themselves likely. So they could have done poorly in school. Their parents might not have been able to help them. So then in turn, they are unable to help their children due to a simple lack of knowledge. So the next one we're going to talk about is our violence exposure. So I do have a statistic from a survey that was conducted by the U.S. Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. So it states that more than 60% of children have been exposed to violence in some form or fashion. That's an obscene amount, and so they have done a lot of research on what violence can do to a child. So the first one is it can give them feelings of helplessness. It can also increase their likelihood of having future drug or alcohol abuse. So that first one that I really want to talk in on is developing violent tendencies. Oftentimes children mimic what they see at home. So for example, if a child sees mom or dad using their hands or using extremely angry and rude words to get what they want or to solve a problem, that child will then do it at school. Instead of asking for a toy, that child could then hit another kid until they do get what they want. They are also desensitized to violence. After you see it so often, you really just don't really care too much about it. You don't care about the pain that it inflicts on others because it's been inflicted on you indirectly for so long. The next one we're going to talk about is poor mental health. It has been tied to children who have experienced violence exposure at higher rates. They experience PTSD, depression, anxiety, among many other things. As I stated in that last bullet point, they are also at a higher risk of addiction for alcoholism or drug addiction. That last one we're going to talk about is the media, something we've all been exposed to, but not quite to the same level as today's children. So it can involve increased violence. It can cause obesity and cyberbullying. So cyberbullying is something that is affecting today's children through the media, and it can result in low self-esteem, mental health issues, eating disorders, and a multitude of other things. So I do have a little fact about a study conducted by Yale University. It revealed that victims of bullying are 2 to 9 times more likely to report suicidal thoughts. And finally, it has a negative effect on learning and academic performances. Children are reported to not go to school, to skip classes simply because of embarrassment or to avoid their bullies. Now, studies have found that children who are cyberbullied are also at a higher risk for lower grades and poor academic achievement due to simply not focusing so much on school and due to their mental health issues. So those are just a few of the effects on children and a few environmental risk factors that are common. There are a multitude of more, but those are just kind of the ones that I wanted to talk about today. Thank you for watching this, and I hope that it was enjoyable and extremely informative for you all.